please, just take the soup.
Mom, we can't afford to share any more food.
Please, just take the soup, Claire said, shoving the steaming cup toward the man huddled against the alley wall. Her son tugged at her sleeve, whispering that they couldn't afford to share any more food. But she ignored him, pressing the cup into the stranger's trembling hands, unaware that the man she was helping owned more buildings in the city than she could ever count. The rain hammered down on the cracked pavement, turning the streets into rivers of grime and forgotten dreams. Claire pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders, feeling the cold seep through the worn fabric. Her son, Danny, pressed close to her side, his small hand clutching hers as they hurried past the bridge where most people quickened their pace and looked away. But Claire wasn't most people. She saw him there, beneath the concrete overhang, a figure so still he might have been part of the shadows. His clothes hung loose on his frame, layers of tattered fabric that had once been something respectable. His face was hidden behind a scraggly beard, and his eyes were downcast, staring at nothing. "Mom, please," Danny whispered, his voice tight with worry. "We barely have enough for ourselves." Claire stopped walking. She looked down at the small container of soup in her hands, the one she'd saved from her shift at the diner. It was supposed to be their dinner, hers and Danny's, split between two bowls back at their tiny apartment. But something in the way the man sat there, so utterly alone, made her feet refuse to move forward. "Wait here," she told Danny, her voice gentle but firm. She approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. Up close, she could see the dirt caked under his fingernails, the way his hands shook slightly even though they were tucked into his coat pockets. But there was something else too, something that didn't quite fit. His posture, despite the exhaustion, held a certain dignity. His silence felt deliberate rather than defeated. "Excuse me," Claire said softly. "I brought you something warm." The man looked up, and for a moment, Claire saw past the grime and the beard. His eyes were clear, intelligent, and filled with something she couldn't quite name. Surprise, maybe? Or recognition of a kindness he'd forgotten existed. "You don't have to do that," he said, his voice rough from disuse but refined in a way that caught her off guard. "I know," Claire replied, extending the soup. "But I want to." He stared at the container for a long moment before slowly reaching out to take it. His fingers wrapped around the warm cup, and Claire noticed something that made her pause. Beneath the frayed sleeve of his coat, just for an instant, she glimpsed the edge of what looked like an expensive watch, the kind with a gold band that caught the light even in the dimness of the bridge. But then it was gone, hidden again beneath layers of fabric and secrets. "Thank you," he murmured, so quietly she almost missed it. Claire nodded and returned to Danny, who was shifting nervously from foot to foot. As they walked away, she felt eyes on her back. She glanced over her shoulder and saw the man watching them, the soup cradled in his hands, his expression unreadable. "Why did you do that?" Danny asked as they turned the corner. Claire squeezed his hand. "Because everyone deserves kindness, baby, no matter what." What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that the man beneath the bridge had been watching the city from his disguise for 3 months. His name was Thomas Hartwell, and he owned half the skyline that loomed above them. He'd built an empire from nothing, accumulated wealth that could feed thousands, and lost his soul somewhere along the way. After his wife died 2 years ago, after the lawyers and the sycophants and the endless parade of people who wanted something from him, Thomas had made a decision. He needed to understand what real life felt like again. He needed to strip away everything and see if there was anything left of the man he used to be. So, he disappeared, left his penthouse, his cars, his company in the hands of his most trusted advisor, and walked into the streets with nothing but the clothes on his back and a single possession he couldn't bear to part with, his wife's watch, the one she'd given him on their 10th anniversary. For 3 months, he'd been invisible. People walked past him without a second glance. Some spat in his direction. Others crossed the street to avoid him. He'd learned what it meant to be nothing, to be no one. Until tonight. Until a woman with tired eyes and worn shoes had stopped and offered him the only food she had. Thomas lifted the cup to his lips and drank. The soup was simple, basic, probably from a can. But it was warm, and it was given freely, and it tasted like redemption. Days turned into a rhythm of survival. Claire worked her shifts at the diner, her feet aching by the time her lunch break came around. She'd pocket extra packets of crackers, a piece of fruit, whatever she could save without getting caught. Then, on her way to her second job, cleaning offices downtown, she'd stop by the bridge. The man was always there, sometimes sleeping, sometimes sitting with his eyes open, watching the world pass by. Claire never asked his name at first. She just brought food, sometimes a blanket she'd found at a thrift store, once a pair of socks that Danny had outgrown. "You're very kind," the man said one evening, accepting a sandwich she'd wrapped in paper napkins. "It's nothing," Claire replied, settling down beside him for a moment. Her shift didn't start for another 20 minutes, and her feet needed the rest. "It's everything," he said quietly. "You'd be surprised how many people forget that." Claire studied him in the fading light. "What's your name?" He hesitated, then said, "Tom, you can call me Tom." "I'm Claire, and that's my son, Danny." She gestured to where Danny sat on a nearby bench, doing his homework under a streetlight. "He's a good kid," Tom observed. "Smart too. I've seen him working on his math. He's trying. School's hard when you don't have the right supplies." Claire didn't mean to let the frustration seep into her voice, but it did. "His teacher wants the class to have calculators for the new unit, scientific ones, $40 each." Tom nodded slowly. "That's a lot of money." "It's impossible money," Claire said with a bitter laugh. "But we'll figure it out. We always do." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the traffic hum in the distance. "How did you end up here?" Claire asked, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry, that's too personal." "No, it's all right," Tom said. "I was in business once, made some choices, lost some things that mattered. Ended up realizing I didn't know who I was anymore." He paused. "So I walked away from it all." Claire processed this, seeing the intelligence in his eyes, the way he spoke. "You could go back," she offered. "It's never too late to start over." Tom smiled, but it was sad. "Maybe. Or maybe some of us need to learn what really matters first." The conversation stayed with Claire as she hurried to her night shift. There was something about Tom, something that didn't quite add up. The way he carried himself, the vocabulary he used, even the condition of his teeth, too good for someone who'd been on the streets for long. But she pushed the thoughts aside. It didn't matter who he'd been. What mattered was who he was now. Someone alone, someone forgotten, someone who needed kindness. Over the following weeks, an unlikely friendship formed. Tom would be there when Claire passed by, and they'd talk. He helped Danny with his homework, explaining algebra concepts with a patience and clarity that amazed Claire. He fixed a broken radio she'd been ready to throw out, his fingers working the wires with practiced skill. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked, watching him work. "Another life," Tom said simply. One night, Claire brought him inside. It had been raining for 3 days straight, and Tom's cough had gotten worse. She'd found him shivering under his thin blanket, his skin too hot to the touch. "I'm calling you a cab," she'd said. "You need a hospital." "No hospitals," Tom rasped. "No records, please." Something in his voice, some desperate note, made Claire relent. Instead, she'd half-carried him to her apartment, ignoring Danny's wide eyes and worried questions. Their place was small, just one bedroom that she and Danny shared, with a pull-out couch in the living room that had seen better days. But it was warm and dry, and that was enough. Tom slept for nearly 16 hours. When he woke, Claire had soup waiting and medicine she'd bought with money she didn't have. He looked around the apartment with eyes that seemed to catalog everything: the water stain on the ceiling, the secondhand furniture, the pile of bills on the small kitchen table. "You shouldn't have brought me here," he said. "You can't afford this." "Nobody can afford kindness if you think about it that way," Claire replied, setting the soup in front of him. "You just do it because it's right." Tom stared at her for a long moment. "Who taught you that?" "My grandmother," Claire said, a soft smile crossing her face. "She raised me after my parents died. We didn't have much, but she always said that being poor in money doesn't mean being poor in spirit." "She sounds wise." She was. Claire sat down across from him. "She died when I was 19, left me enough to finish one semester of college, and then Danny came along and, well, life had different plans." Tom took a spoonful of soup. "Danny's father? Gone before Danny was born, said he wasn't ready to be a father, which I guess was more honest than sticking around and doing it badly." Claire shrugged, though the old hurt still flickered. We're fine. We have each other. Tom watched Danny playing quietly in the corner, building something with worn Lego blocks. You're doing a good job with him. I'm trying. Claire's voice wavered slightly. Some days I wonder if trying is enough. It is, Tom said with certainty. Believe me, I've seen plenty of parents with all the money in the world who couldn't give their children what you give Danny every single day. The conviction in his voice made Claire look at him sharply. You sound like you know from experience. Tom looked away. I've seen a lot of things. In my old life. He stayed for 3 days, sleeping on the couch, helping around the apartment. Claire noticed how naturally he took to small tasks, fixing the leaky faucet she'd been ignoring, organizing the cluttered closet with an efficiency that spoke of someone used to systems and order. On the 3rd morning, she woke to find him standing by the window, staring out at the city skyline. He was wearing the same clothes, but he'd washed them, and in the morning light, she could see the man beneath the disguise more clearly. Strong features, intelligent eyes, hands that had known hard work, but also luxury. Tom, she said softly. He turned and there was something different in his expression. Resolve, maybe, or sadness. Claire, I need to tell you something, he began. But before he could continue, Danny ran in, excited about a school project, and the moment passed. Tom smiled at the boy, helped him organize his poster board, and by the time Claire looked up from making breakfast, whatever he'd been about to say was locked away again. That night, Tom returned to the bridge. Claire had offered to let him stay longer, but he'd insisted he was well enough. You've already done too much, he'd said at the door. More than you know. Will you be all right? Claire asked. Tom reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and firm. Better than I've been in years. Thank you, Claire, for everything. For reminding me that kindness doesn't need money, just a heart. Claire watched him walk away, a strange feeling. It settling in her chest, like she just said goodbye to someone important, though she couldn't explain why. She didn't see him for 2 days after that. The bridge was empty, his blanket gone. Claire felt an unexpected pang of worry, then loss. She'd gotten used to their conversations, to the way Tom listened like her words actually mattered. On the 3rd day, she brought Danny with her to check. The space under the bridge was empty except for a piece of paper weighted down with a stone. Claire picked it up with trembling fingers. The handwriting was elegant, precise. Thank you for reminding me what matters. I'm sorry I can't explain everything now, but I promise you'll understand soon. You saved me, Claire, in ways you can't imagine. Tom! Claire read it 3 times, her throat tight. Danny pressed against her side. Is he okay, Mom? I don't know, baby, Claire whispered. I hope so. Life got harder after that. The diner cut back her hours due to slow business. 2 shifts a week disappeared just like that, taking with them the fragile balance she'd maintained. The rent came due, and Claire found herself staring at numbers that didn't add up, no matter how she rearranged them. She took on extra cleaning jobs, working until midnight some nights, then getting up at 5 to make Danny breakfast before school. Her body ached constantly. She lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, but she kept going because that's what mothers do. They keep going. She thought about Tom sometimes, wondered where he was, if he was safe. Part of her felt foolish for caring so much about a homeless man she'd known for a few weeks. But another part, the part that had seen the intelligence in his eyes and heard the pain in his voice, knew he'd been something more. Someone searching for answers in the last place anyone would think to look. 6 weeks after Tom disappeared, Claire came home from her evening shift to find a black town car parked outside her building. She slowed her steps, wary. Cars like that didn't come to this neighborhood unless someone was in trouble. A man in an expensive suit stood beside the car, holding an envelope. He straightened when he saw her approach. Claire Morrison? He asked. Who's asking? Claire's hand went protectively to her purse, where her phone was buried somewhere in the chaos. My name is Richard Chen. I'm here on behalf of Thomas Hartwell. He extended the envelope. He asked me to deliver this personally. Claire took it, her hands shaking slightly. Tom? Yes, ma'am. Though I believe you knew him by a slightly different name. Richard's expression was professional, but not unkind. Mr. Hartwell wanted you to have this. He said you'd know what to do. Before Claire could ask anything else, Richard returned to the car and drove away. leaving her standing on the sidewalk with an envelope that felt too heavy for paper alone. Inside, she found a letter written in that same elegant handwriting, along with a business card and what looked like a job offer from the Hartwell Foundation. Claire's hands shook as she read. "Dear Claire, I'm sorry for the deception. My name is Thomas Hartwell, and I'm the CEO of Hartwell Industries. 2 years ago, I lost my wife to cancer. In the aftermath, I lost myself too. I became so consumed with work, with maintaining an empire, that I forgot what any of it was for. So I walked away. I wanted to understand what life looked like from the bottom, to see if I could find the man I used to be before the money, before the power. I thought if I could strip everything away, I might find something real. What I found was you. You who had nothing and gave everything. You who taught your son to measure wealth not in dollars, but in kindness. You who saw a homeless stranger and chose compassion over convenience every single time. You reminded me what I'd lost. You showed me that humanity isn't about what you have. It's about what you're willing to share. I'm starting a new foundation dedicated to helping single mothers and families in need. I want you to run it, not because you need saving, but because you understand what these families face. You've lived it. You've survived it. And somehow, despite everything, you've kept your heart open. The job comes with a real salary, benefits, and housing assistance. It's not charity, it's an opportunity. You've earned this, Claire, more than anyone I've ever met. If you're willing, come to the address on the business card tomorrow at 10. I'll explain everything. And Claire, thank you. For the soup, for the kindness, for reminding a lost man what it means to be human. Thomas." Claire read the letter 3 times, then a 4th. Her mind spun with questions, disbelief, and a tiny, fragile hope. She looked at the business card, Hartwell Foundation, with an address in the financial district. "This has to be a scam," she whispered to herself. "This can't be real." But the letterhead was embossed, expensive. The business card was professionally printed. And something in her gut, some instinct honed by years of reading people across diner counters, told her it was true. Thomas, had been telling the truth about his past, just not in the way she'd imagined. The next morning, Claire called in sick to both her jobs. She put on her one good dress, the one she saved for Danny's school events, and took 2 buses to reach the address on the card. The building was glass and steel, reaching toward the sky with the kind of confidence only serious money could buy. Inside, the lobby was all marble and modern art. Claire felt completely out of place in her worn dress and practical shoes. But the receptionist smiled warmly when she gave her name and directed her to the top floor. The elevator ride felt eternal. Claire's reflection stared back at her from the polished walls, and she saw a woman who'd been tired for so long she'd forgotten what it was like to not be exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, lines of stress. Around her mouth, hands that were rough from constant work. The doors opened to reveal a stunning office suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the entire city. And standing by those windows, dressed in an immaculate suit, was Tom. Except he wasn't Tom anymore. His beard was gone, revealing strong features and a jawline that belonged in magazines. His hair was cut and styled. He looked younger, powerful, and utterly transformed. But when he turned and their eyes met, Claire saw the same man who'd sat under the bridge, the one who'd helped Danny with his homework and fixed her radio. The same eyes, the same soul. "Claire," Thomas said, and his voice cracked slightly. "Thank you for coming." Claire couldn't speak. She just stood there, taking it all in, the office, the view, the man who'd somehow been both homeless and a billionaire. "I know you have questions," Thomas continued, walking toward her, "and I'll answer all of them. But first, I need you to understand something." He stopped a few feet away, maintaining a respectful distance. "Everything in that letter was true. You saved me, not with money or connections or anything the world values. You saved me with kindness, simple, genuine kindness when I needed it most. You were testing me," Claire said, her voice flat. "No," Thomas shook his head firmly. "I was testing myself, trying to see if there was anything worth saving in who I'd become. You just happened to be the person who answered that question." Claire's hands clenched into fists. "Do you have any idea what the last 6 weeks have been like? Wondering if you were okay? If you were even alive? I know, and I'm sorry. Thomas's expression was genuinely pained. I had to figure out what came next. I had to build something worthy of what you showed me. He gestured to a portfolio on his desk. The Hartwell Foundation. It's real, Claire. Fully funded, legally established. Its mission is to provide housing assistance, childcare support, job training, and educational resources to single parents and families in crisis. Claire walked to the desk, her legs unsteady. She opened the portfolio and saw page after page of plans, budgets, and programs. It was real. All of it was real. You want me to run this? She asked quietly. I want you to lead it, Thomas corrected. The salary is competitive, $85,000 to start, with room for growth. Full benefits, including health insurance for you and Danny, will help you relocate to a safe neighborhood, somewhere with good schools. Claire's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. Why me? You could hire someone with experience, someone who knows how to run a foundation. I could, Thomas agreed. But they wouldn't understand. Not the way you do. They wouldn't know what it's like to choose between paying rent and buying your child's school supplies. They wouldn't know the shame of having to pocket crackers from work just to make sure your kid has lunch. He moved closer, his voice gentle. You know what these families need because you've needed it. You know what hope looks like when it's almost gone because you've held on to it with bleeding fingers. That's worth more than any business degree. Claire looked out the windows at the city sprawling below. Somewhere down there was her apartment, her life, her son doing homework by himself because she had to work. Somewhere down there was the bridge where she'd met a homeless man and changed both their lives. What if I mess it up? She whispered. Then we'll fix it together, Thomas said simply. Claire, I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you a partnership. You have something I lost. You have perspective, empathy, and an understanding of what really matters. I have resources. Together, we can actually help people. Claire turned to face him. You really disappeared for 3 months? Just walked away from all this? I did. And I learned more in those 3 months than I had in the previous 10 years. Thomas's expression grew distant. After my wife died, I threw myself into work. I thought if I could just build the company bigger, make more money, prove something to the world, that the grief would matter less. But it didn't. It just made me more isolated, more disconnected. So you became homeless. I became invisible, Thomas corrected. And in that invisibility, I saw the truth about people. Most walked past without seeing me. Some were cruel. A few were kind, but in a hurried, uncomfortable way. But you, he paused, emotion flickering across his face. You sat with me. You talked to me like I was a person, not a problem to be solved or a guilt to be assuaged. Claire thought about those evenings under the bridge, the conversations they'd had. You were never really homeless, were you? You could have stopped any time. Physically, yes. Mentally? Thomas shook his head. I was as lost as any person on those streets. Money doesn't protect you from despair, Claire. Sometimes it just builds bigger walls around it. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of truth settling between them. I need time to think, Claire finally said. This is a lot to process. Of course, take all the time you need. Thomas handed her another card. That's my personal number. Call me when you're ready, whether it's yes or no. And Claire, he met her eyes. Regardless of your decision, I've already set up a fund for Danny's education. Full ride, any school he wants. You can't refuse that. He earned it with his kindness, too. Claire felt the tears finally break through. You don't have to. I want to, Thomas interrupted gently. Consider it payment for the soup. Best meal I ever had. Claire left the building in a daze. She rode the bus home with Thomas's business card in her pocket and a future she'd never imagined suddenly within reach. When she picked Danny up from school, she held him extra tight. Mom, you're squishing me, Danny protested, but he was smiling. I love you, baby, Claire whispered into his hair. You know that, right? Everything I do is because I love you. I know, Mom. I love you too. That night, after Danny was asleep, Claire sat at their small kitchen table and really looked at the job offer. The salary alone was more than she made in a year working 2 jobs. The benefits package included dental. Danny could finally get his cavity filled. The housing assistance meant a real home, maybe even a yard. But more than that, it was a chance to help people like her. People who were drowning and just needed someone to throw them a rope. People who'd been invisible for too long. She thought about Thomas, about the man who'd had everything and found it wasn't enough. About someone so lost he had to lose everything to find himself. There was something profound in that. Something that spoke to the core of who Claire wanted to be. She called the number on the card. Thomas answered on the second ring. "Claire, I have one condition," she said. "Name it. The foundation has to include the homeless population too. Not just families, everyone. Because sometimes the person who needs help most is the one nobody sees." There was a pause, then Thomas's voice came through, thick with emotion. "Done. We'll call it the Second Chance Initiative." "Then I'm in," Claire said. "I'll do it." 3 months later, Claire stood on a small stage in a hotel ballroom. The Hartwell Foundation's inaugural charity gala was in full swing, attended by business leaders, philanthropists, and media. She wore a dress that actually fit, her hair professionally done, but she still felt like the same woman who'd given soup to a stranger under a bridge. Thomas stood beside her, introducing her to the crowd. "Claire Morrison is the heart of this foundation," he was saying. "She understands that real wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the lives we touch and the kindness we share. She saw someone invisible and chose to see them anyway. That's the spirit we want to bring to every family we help." The crowd applauded. Claire stepped up to the microphone, her hands shaking slightly. 6 months ago, I was working 2 jobs and struggling to keep a roof over my son's head," she began. "I was tired, scared, and running out of hope. But I still stopped to help a homeless man because my grandmother taught me that kindness costs nothing and means everything." She looked out at the crowd, seeing faces that had never known that kind of struggle. "I didn't know that man was Thomas Hartwell, and it didn't matter. Because kindness shouldn't depend on who someone is or what they can do for you. It should be given freely, without expectation, because we're all human and we all deserve dignity." Claire's voice grew stronger. "The Hartwell Foundation exists because one act of simple kindness reminded a lost man of his humanity. And now, we're here to extend that kindness to thousands of families who need it. We're here to say, you're not invisible. You matter, and we're going to help you build the life you deserve." The applause was thunderous. Claire stepped back, overwhelmed. Thomas caught her eye and smiled. Not the polished CEO smile, but the genuine one she'd first seen under a bridge. After the speeches, after the networking and the photographs, Claire found a quiet corner. Danny was there, dressed in a new suit, munching on appetizers he'd never tried before. "This is weird, Mom," he said through a mouthful of shrimp. Claire laughed. "Yeah, baby, it really is." Thomas approached, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He offered one to Claire, and they stood together, watching the crowd. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for saying yes, for taking a chance." "Thank you for seeing value in soup and kindness," Claire replied. "Most people wouldn't. Most people aren't you." They clinked glasses, sealing a partnership that had begun with soup and grown into something that would change thousands of lives. 6 months later, the foundation had helped 93 families. They'd placed 48 people in job training programs. They'd provided housing assistance to families on the brink of homelessness and counseling services to those struggling with trauma and loss. Claire loved her work with a passion she'd never felt before. Every person she helped, every family she guided toward stability, felt like honoring that moment under the bridge when she'd chosen compassion over convenience. Thomas remained involved but let Claire run the programs. He trusted her instincts, valued her perspective, and never once made her feel less than equal, despite their different backgrounds. One evening, as she was leaving the office, Claire found Thomas standing by the window of the conference room, staring out at the city. It reminded her of that first morning in his office, the way he'd looked at the skyline like it was both his kingdom and his prison. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked. Thomas turned, smiling. "Just thinking about soup," Claire laughed. "That must have been really good soup." "It was the best soup I ever had," Thomas said seriously, "because it came with a reminder that I'd forgotten. That being human isn't about what you have, but about what you're willing to give." "You know," Claire said, moving to stand beside him, "I've been thinking about that night a lot. What would have happened if I'd walked past you like everyone else? I'd probably still be figuring things out," Thomas admitted. "Still be lost. And I'd still be working double shifts, wondering if I'd ever catch a break." Claire shook her head in wonder. It's strange how one small choice can change everything. It wasn't small, Thomas corrected. It was everything. You gave me something I couldn't buy, Claire. You gave me back myself. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights begin to twinkle as evening fell. Somewhere down there, beneath those lights, were people struggling the way Claire had struggled. People who felt invisible, forgotten, lost. But now there was a foundation with resources and heart, ready to help. Because a single mother had stopped to share soup with a stranger, and that stranger had turned out to be someone who could turn kindness into action on a scale neither of them had imagined. "Do you ever miss it?" Claire asked suddenly. "Being invisible? Being Tom instead of Thomas Hartwell?" Thomas considered the question. "Sometimes," he admitted. There was a freedom in it, a simplicity. But I think I needed that experience to get here, to understand what really matters so I could do something meaningful with what I have. "And what really matters?" Claire prompted. "Connection," Thomas said simply. "Seeing people, being seen, knowing that we're all just trying to survive, and maybe, if we're lucky, we'll find someone along the way who reminds us we don't have to do it alone." Claire felt her throat tighten. "That's beautiful. That's what you taught me." As Claire drove home that night, past streets she used to walk in exhaustion, past the bridge where everything had changed, she thought about the strange journey that had brought her here, about soup and kindness, and a billionaire who disguised himself as homeless to find his humanity. At home, Danny was doing homework at their new kitchen table in their new apartment, the one with heat that worked and windows that closed properly. He looked up when she entered and smiled. "How was work, Mom?" "Good, baby, really good." Later, after Danny was asleep, Claire stood by his bedroom door and watched him breathe. She thought about all the nights she'd stood like this, wondering how she'd make it through another month, another week, another day. She thought about the fear that had been her constant companion and the exhaustion that had worn her down to nothing. And she thought about a choice she'd made on a rainy evening, to stop and share soup with a stranger when she couldn't afford to share anything at all. That choice had changed her life. But more than that, it had proven something she'd always believed, but sometimes doubted. That kindness matters. That seeing people matters. That every act of compassion, no matter how small, ripples outward in ways we can't predict or control. Thomas had needed to be saved from his own success. Claire had needed to be saved from her circumstances. And somehow, impossibly, they'd saved each other. The foundation continued to grow. A year later, they'd helped over 300 families. 2 years later, they'd expanded to 3 cities. The work was hard, the needs were endless, but Claire woke up every morning knowing her life had purpose beyond survival. And Thomas, he was different too. Still brilliant, still driven, but with a gentleness that hadn't been there before. He spent time at the foundation centers, talking to families, listening to their stories, remembering what it felt like to be invisible. They never forgot the bridge where it all began. Sometimes on quiet evenings, they'd drive past it together, remembering the man and woman who'd met there, both lost, both searching, both needing exactly what the other had to give. "Do you think it was fate?" Claire asked one night as they sat in the car looking at the bridge. "I think it was choice," Thomas replied. "You chose kindness when it was hard. I chose to search for meaning in unexpected places. Those choices mattered. They changed everything. They changed us," Thomas corrected. "And that changed everything else." Claire looked at the bridge, at the space where a homeless man had once huddled against the cold and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not for the money or the job or the security, though those things mattered, but for the reminder that she'd carried her grandmother's lesson faithfully through years of struggle. Kindness costs nothing and means everything. As they drove away, Claire thought about all the people they had helped, all the families who'd found hope when they'd thought it was gone. She thought about Danny, thriving in his new school, his college funds secure. She thought about Thomas, who had found his way back to himself through the simple act of accepting soup from a stranger. And she wondered about all the moments happening right now, all over the world, moments where someone was choosing between compassion and convenience, between seeing and looking away. Moments that could change everything, if only someone was brave enough to stop. The question that stayed with her, that whispered through her thoughts as they drove through the city lights, was simple but profound. How many billionaires are hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to see them? And how many struggling souls have riches of spirit that the world will never recognize unless someone chooses to stop, to share, to care? If this story touched you, hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever helped a stranger without knowing their story? Let us know.